Is it possible to be intentionally unintentional? Or asked in another way, is there power in the absence of intention? These are provocative questions that I've spent a good part of my professional career exploring. If true, the implication is in many ways contrary to what we were taught growing up: to make decisions deliberately, to actively seek those experiences that are uniquely capable of preparing us to achieve our life goals. This is definitely true in business school, where from day one, we are encouraged to be methodical as we chart our future paths. From selecting classes to club leadership positions to picking that perfect summer internship between the first and the second year, everything is framed in terms of how do we make this achieve our life, how do we help achieve our life goals. Today, however, I'd like to offer a contrarian view. I'd like to take you on a journey through my time in India and in Africa that led me to the belief that by actively seeking unfamiliar and uncomfortable environments, I could actually achieve much greater personal leadership development. Rather than pursuing a specific experience or lesson, I learned to be intentional, but only to a certain point, after which, by definition, I could no longer dictate outcomes. What I found is that it is from these spaces of ambiguity, or at times personal chaos, that comes some of the most impactful personal and professional growth. Now, to understand how this all started, this isn't a belief I've always held. To understand how this all got started, I need to take you on a trip down memory lane to 2006. Now, I'm a sufficiently awkward high school senior. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Maybe not this awkward all of the time. Okay, there we go. That's a little bit better. Now, I just read Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, and had become fascinated with emerging markets. In particular, China and India were growing at in excess of 8% annually GDP, and I really wanted to go to those places. So now fast forward a few years later, and now I'm a sophomore at DePauw University, and a new internship is created, a semester-long internship is created through a special partnership between DePauw and Cummins, a Fortune 500 diesel engine and power generation manufacturer. I immediately apply and am fortunate enough to be named one of the first 2 interns. I am beyond excited. I feel on top of the world. I've clinched an international finance internship. Let's see here. And I clinched an international finance internship at a Fortune 500 company in one of the hottest 2 emerging markets. I've hit the trifecta. In my mind, I'm going to India, and I'm going to learn all about international finance and strategy and set the foundation for an incredible international business career. Can you sense the calculation in my decision-making process? It turns out none of that actually happens. Despite asking for work repeatedly, I mostly just sit around for 6 months. You see, the concept of an internship, at least how we all think about it, didn't really exist in India at the time. They thought of it more of a job shadow. That, coupled with the fact that my internship host hadn't really prepared for my arrival, led to a really disappointing work experience. I returned to the US feeling devastated, thinking, how did I blow this incredible opportunity on such a fruitless experience? However, as I think about it more and more, and I reflect on my time in India, I realized I'd actually learned a whole lot. But the growth had come from what at the time seemed like a really odd place: daily life. Activities like buying groceries, getting my haircut, had become new experiences and challenges, sources of growth. Let me give an example. There's this saying that goes, in the US, traffic lights are the rule. In China, they are a recommendation. And in India, they are decorations. Now, it probably doesn't come as much of a surprise that traffic in India's major cities is really bad. It rarely stops for anything. Part of my daily commute to the office involved crossing this really major street, walking. I remember walking up to it the first day and thinking, how on earth am I going to get across this thing? I feel petrified. Out of desperation, I do the only thing I can. I start to observe those around me. I watch how they cross the street. They take a few steps out, let traffic flow in front and behind them, take another couple of steps, let some more traffic flow in front and behind them, and they eventually get across the street. When I muster up enough courage of my own, I attach myself to the hip of a complete stranger and do my best to follow along. Slowly but surely, I learned how to cross these streets. I learned a profound lesson from this rather mundane and unremarkable activity of crossing the street. I learned the power of imitation. In this case, it was imitation out of desperation, as without mimicking others, I quite literally would have never learned how to cross the street. But there was a more meaningful message here. Imitation had become a key part of integrating culturally for me. Within a week, this was especially true when it came to the nonverbal communication that is prevalent in India. Within a week of arriving, I started to notice the ubiquitous head nod that I'm sure those of you who have been to India are familiar with. It's somewhere between a yes and a no, looks like this, and it can kind of be used to answer any question. Now, initially, I have no idea what it means or how to interpret it. I remember on one occasion, I'd asked a colleague a question, and he responded with a head nod. And I had to say, Sumit, I don't know what you're saying. Is that a yes or is that a no? Without fully understanding it, I just start to imitate it, because at the very least, I can tell it's an important part of communication. Through trial and error, I do slowly learn how to use the head nod properly. Now, imitation has a lot of negative connotations. Some people call it unoriginal. Others go as far as calling it condescending or patronizing. However, imitation can come from a place of great sincerity and vulnerability. When you let your guard down and you accept you don't know how to do something, imitating others can be seen as a sign of respect or a desire to learn. Think about if you've traveled internationally to a place you don't speak the local language. Any attempt you make to even learn a few words is often received with great warmth. At least this has been my experience. At its core, this is imitation. And I now try to embrace it when I'm placed in unfamiliar and uncomfortable situations. My time in India was, my time in India was transformative. While I had gone there to learn a specific set of finance and business, I went there to learn a specific finance and business skill set, I instead walked away having started down an incredible path of personal growth, marked by life lessons such as this greater appreciation for imitation. More importantly, though, I walked away with a profoundly different perspective of what it means to be intentional. What struck me was how the growth I had come not as the result of a specific action, but instead of just putting myself in a certain type of environment in the first place. This was a turning point for me. Whereas in India, the growth was largely accidental, I now started to seek out opportunities where I knew I'd be placed back into these types of environments. Despite a disappointing work experience in India, I'd grown quite fond of Cummins as a company, and I joined full-time in 2010. After 18 months of persistently lobbying for an overseas work assignment, I had two opportunities were presented to me. One was in Belgium, and one was in South Africa. In deciding between the two, I asked myself one simple question. Which role would most consistently put me back into those types of environments where I knew growth would occur? Needless to say, I packed my bags and I was on my way to Africa. While in the end, I had 4 amazing years in Africa. And while I was based in South Africa, I spent the majority of my time traveling across the continent, helping Cummins establish and grow new businesses. In total, I visited over a dozen African countries, and I made many lifelong friends along the way. Growth continued to come from unusual places where I was least expecting it, and most importantly, as the result of no specific action. A perfect example of this is a trip I took early last year to attend a friend's wedding. Now, it's a warm Saturday morning, and I'm driving about an hour south of Johannesburg to a small township named Sebokeng. With the name of the church and a smartphone, I feel I have everything I need to navigate to the wedding. In the 3.5 years I'd lived in South Africa, never once had I had a problem navigating with GPS. But by the 3rd failed attempt to find the Dutch Reformed Church, I had run into 4 other cars full of equally lost wedding guests. For the next 2 hours, we aimlessly caravan across the township, asking dozens of local townspeople if they know where the church is. And we're consistently met with puzzled looks, almost as if they don't even know what we're asking them. And this is not a language barrier issue. Everyone is speaking English. We then stumble upon an elderly woman gardening in her front yard. Tired, stressed, beyond fashionably late, and in what I am sure to be the 15th futile attempt to ascertain the location of the church, I ask her, I say, "Hey, Mom, do you know where the Dutch Reformed Church is?" She looks at me and she says, "The church with red bricks and a green roof is just over there, but I don't know what its name is." And that's when it hits me. I'd been approaching the problem in completely the wrong way. The church was not known by its English name, but instead by its physical description. Addresses, street names, maps, this was not the system through which this community primarily navigated. They navigated by landmark and physical description. Thus, the church didn't have an address, wasn't really on a map. That wouldn't have made any sense. Offering to show us the way, the elderly woman climbed into my Jeep, and we arrived at the church within 5 minutes. Luckily, the pastor was still preaching, and we hadn't missed the whole ceremony. Now, it took me a few weeks to fully synthesize the implications of the experience I'd had in Seabokane. Ultimately, I failed to locate the church because I was operating with a framework that wasn't compatible with the environment I was in at the time. Furthermore, the correct framework to use never once crossed my mind. Navigating by physical description and landmark never once crossed my mind. To use the common idiom, it goes beyond putting yourself in someone else's shoes because you potentially don't even know what those shoes look like. Now when I face a particularly challenging problem, I attempt to relinquish everything I think I know and actively try to think about the situation from a different perspective. And most importantly, be cognizant that they may not even know what some of those alternative perspectives look like. My time in Africa was highlighted by experiences such as these. Great personal leadership insights that came from nothing more than putting myself in uncomfortable environments. So why does all of this matter? I've noticed the connection between the types of personal leadership insights that come when you place yourself in uncomfortable environments and the attributes of successful global leaders. Leadership today consists of operating in an increasingly interconnected world, in a world that has increasingly diverse teams. Yet, diverse teams are not in and of themselves enough to solve today's greatest challenges. Leaders need to know how to harness the different perspectives and life experiences of their teams in order to come up with innovative solutions. If you think about it, it's actually silly to think that one person with one set of life experiences knows the right path forward all of the time. A great leader is not only someone who is confident enough to accept when they don't know the right path forward, but someone who's willing to consciously think about and leverage perspectives other than their own, even if they're not fully comfortable or they don't fully understand those alternative perspectives. Leaders need to know when to imitate others, or more importantly, when to broaden their horizons to consider perspectives they didn't know existed before. And make no mistake, this takes deliberate action. Taking a step back and saying, hey, maybe there's a solution to this problem I haven't thought of yet. That takes intention. But wait, haven't I been saying all along, don't be intentional? Herein lies the paradox of what I'm suggesting. In order to truly learn and embrace these types of personal leadership insights, you cannot intentionally seek them out. You can only intentionally put yourself in the types of environments where these lessons naturally emerge. You have to be intentionally unintentional. What's important here is not the specific lesson or experience, but rather the willingness to put yourselves in the types of situations where these lessons present themselves in the first place. Well, I've highlighted two personal leadership insights today. There are many other lessons that can only truly emerge when you put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Actively seek uncomfortable and unfamiliar environments, consciously aware that these are the spaces where the greatest growth naturally occurs. Thank you.